So we're going to play with some tone wood here, and we'll actually see why it's called tone wood. Besides that it's put into guitars, there is a musical aspect to each of the boards. And when you put all the boards together, you get a combination of these different tones, and it starts to make music. Of course, proportions do make a difference, but each wood has a kind of distinctive sound. And this is an old piece of Brazilian rosewood, and you can kind of hear that it has a very glass-like or bronze-like sound to it. And this would be used for a fingerboard. It's a little thick, so its pitch is a little higher than this board would be if it were Brazilian. And this one is ebony. And you'll hear that this gives a different characteristic to the fingerboard sound. You can hear that there's very little sustain in ebony. It has a high-pitched attack, and then it has a lot of what's called dampening, so that it controls the sound. And that is something that really changes the sound of the neck. Now, if you have a combination of woods, and mahogany is another wood that's used in necks, and this, though it's not a neck, well, actually I have a neck piece here. This is just mahogany, and you can hear that there's not a whole lot of resonance in the neck. So if you add to it Brazilian, can't really tell from that, but if you add this sound to it, you'll get a more resonant and warm sound. And if you add this to it, you'll get a more controlled sound or a more dampening in the neck. And my preference for acoustic guitars is to have a neck that has good dampening, and therefore bringing a lot of the energy into the box.
Free man on the mountain, up on Calvary, and the man in the middle was Jesus. He died for you and me. And the man in the middle was Jesus. He died for you and me.
Now we're going to play with some various top woods. Here is some European spruce. It's about 50 years old, and it has been thickness to a little thicker than a guitar top, but not much. You can hear that it's very resonant and would make just a great guitar. And this piece is Sitka spruce, and you can hear that it has a different kind of resonance, but this is also a really good piece of wood. Then we go to some Adirondack spruce here. You can hear with the Adirondack spruce, the other two spruces you could hear a kind of sustain to them. And with Adirondack spruce, what I find is that it has more of that dampening effect. It doesn't have quite the sustain that the other tone woods do. Like this is Sitka. The interesting thing with the Sitka compared to the Adirondack is that in the high registers, you get dampening, but in the low registers, you get a sustain. Like this is what I mean, the sustain on this one in the low register, but dampening more in the high register. what you find from all this is that tapping tone wood of various species, the tops are much closer related than you might think they would be from what we hear in guitars and what the tones are attributed to them. I mean, I won't say that there is not a difference, species to species, because there certainly is, but you can hear from these, that being the Alpine spruce or Italian spruce, this being the Adirondack, and this is nice Sitka. And this being some old European spruce. You have to listen to the resonance rather than the pitch, because the pitch is determined by the size. So a thinner piece will sound a lower pitch than a thicker piece, which will sound at a higher pitch. So what you have to listen to instead of the pitch is the character of the note or the sustain. You can hear the overtones in that one, and in this one you can hear more of a fundamental. And then hear that high note that goes over it. And those are all great tops. They'll all make great guitars. For the backwoods, I generally think of them as a spectrum of reverb. Honduras rosewood has a bell-like reverb. Brazilian rosewood has a rich reverb, and if you were talking electronics, like a really good lexicon reverb. And maple has the dry sound, and there are other tone woods in between. Mahogany is not as dry as maple, but definitely drier than Indian rosewood, and Indian rosewood is drier than Brazilian rosewood. And cocobolo is a little drier than Brazilian rosewood, but pretty closely related. So you have, on one end of the spectrum, Brazilian rosewood, which rings and gives quite a bit of reverb to the guitar. Real bell-like kind of sound. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have maple, which is a real dry sound, and it gives you very little ring. Sort of like hitting cardboard or a cigar box. It'll still make a wonderful guitar, but it gives a really different character. It gives a much drier sound, much less reverb. And then in that spectrum of reverb where Brazilian rosewood has the most reverb and maple has the least or the driest sound, there falls Indian rosewood, cocobolo, and mahogany. Mahogany, I feel, has the closest character to maple, or the next level of reverb. And you can hear a slight bit more reverberance in this, but it's not anything like the Brazilian. And then next to that, I would put Indian rosewood. This is the Indian rosewood sound, which you can hear is definitely more reverberant than mahogany, but definitely less reverberant than Brazilian rosewood. And then cocobolo fits between Indian rosewood and Brazilian rosewood. So it's got more reverberance and sustain than the Indian rosewood does, but less so than the Brazilian.